Yo, what's up, everybody? It's Goomer22. Today, we're going to be talking about the best Tera type. Uh, Full disclaimer, I have not been subjecting myself to any type of spoilers. I don't know anything more than what the Pokemon Company has put out about terastallization or Tera types. So if people have, you know, figured out more stuff and it doesn't apply, then, well, sorry, I got it wrong. But these are going to be my takes on Tera types generally. They mostly apply to VGC, and I'll throw in some commentary based on VGC draft leagues as well with regards to these Tera types. So, without further ado, let's jump into it. So, Terrastallization Characteristics, as I understand it, permanently changes one Pokemon's type, and it lasts the entire duration of the match. You can only do it once, so you can only do it on one of your Pokemon. And if you Terrastallize into one of your original types, then you get an extra boost on your stab attack. So, also Terrastallization gives you, if you have the move Tera Blast, it allows you to access Tera Blast with a either physical or special type, depending on whether your special attack or physical attack is higher. So it can you get some access to a different, basically a different coverage move if you need it. So with that being the baseline of Terrastallization, let's jump into all the types and how each one will function with Terrastallization. All right, so type number one is Fire. So Fire Tera, the cool thing about it is that it should prevent burns. And this is really interesting for like physical attackers with abilities that prevent Intimidate. So like Own Tempo. So something like like a Mudsdale or a Licky Licky who have Own Tempo. Something like as well as stat lorn abilities like Clear Body. So something like a Metagross, right? You already can't be intimidated or have your stats lowered. So the best way to deal with its physical output is to burn it, with Will-O-Wisp or something like that. And so if you change yourself into Fire type, now you can't be burned. So that's going to be the biggest, I think, benefit of Fire Tera. In terms of moves, specifically spread moves, Fire has some of the best moves. It's got Overheat, it's got Burn Up, but it's also got Heat Wave, which I think is probably one of the best spammable and strong spread moves in the game. It's base 90 power, or it might be 95, but it's just the ability to burn your opponents. It's just very spammable. You throw it out there, you might get a random burn, and that just cripples physical attackers. So I think any Pokemon able to throw out huge heat waves, something like a Chandelure, can just really take advantage of that Fire Tera. Let's jump to the next type. We've got Bug Tera. Bug Tera does not have a lot going for it, but a few unique things. One thing I think is interesting is that you get stronger stab U-turns. So a lot of Pokemon get access to U-turn that are not Bug type. But even if you are Bug type, you just get that much more power on your U-turn. So it can allow you to pivot, and if you're pivoting, it gives you those strong attacks. And you could actually find some unique scenarios where you get that stronger pivot move, and it's beneficial to your typing. And I think that's where it really can shine. So right here, I put an example of like Tapu Koko, right? So Tapu Koko is electric and fairy. And so ground is obviously a big concern for it. Now, thankfully, Bug actually resists ground. That's one of the benefits of Bug type. And so if Tapu Koko switches to Bug type, then it gets that stronger stab U-turn and it removes its ground weakness. So I think that some Pokemon like that could be interesting candidates for Bug Tera. But like across the board, I don't expect Bug Terra to be super common. So, I expect it to be more of a mix-up option because people might not necessarily prepare for facing bug types all the time, and Bug Terra might not be super common. So you may have to keep it in the back of your mind as like a mix-up option that your opponent might not be prepped for. However, you do in certain cases have extremely strong priority first impressions. A Pokemon like Haxorus, which is not bug type, but extremely strong attack power, and it has access to first impression. I mean, you give it stab. Oh my gosh, that's probably OHKOing a lot of semi frail Pokemon there. So access to extremely strong first impressions could be a unique characteristic for Bugterra because I believe first impression is the strongest priority move at base 90 power. So the next one let's jump into is Electric Terra. Electric Terra is pretty interesting. It's one that with the current abilities you can entirely eliminate your weaknesses. That's a unique property of it. So if you have the ability to levitate and you use Terrastallize into electric type, now you've completely mitigated any weaknesses. So that's a really, really interesting characteristic. You also get strong Volt Switches, which are similar to Bug, except for I think less Pokemon get Volt Switch that aren't normally electric type anyways. So it's I would say less important than on that feature. But a really cool feature is immune to paralysis. So if you are facing something like that has Prankster Thunderwave, or maybe something that has Nuzzle, and you really just don't want to get paralyzed, I think having the option to Terrastallize into electric type is really, really interesting for that aspect. Not too much more to say there, but I do think this is going to be a really interesting one. The next Terra type we'll talk about is Normal. Normal, I think, is really, really cool because right now Normal has the strongest attacks, and a lot of Pokemon get access to these. So you've got Hyper Beam, you've got Giga Impact, and I threw Boom Burst on there just because it's a really, really strong spread move. But the fact that so many Pokemon get access to these moves, and then being able to normal Terrastallize and get a boost on top of the already high base power of these moves, I think is going to be really, really interesting. The other cool thing about normal Terra is that it's kind of a somewhat safe defensive option because it only has one weakness. And I don't think fighting is like as super common as ground. So if you don't have Levitate, right, and electric type only has one weakness, and if you don't have Levitate and you Terrastallize into electric, I mean, I feel like Earthquake and Bulldoze, ground type moves in general are fairly common, and so you do risk getting hit by a super effective move. Whereas fighting doesn't have any spread moves, and it's not terribly common. And so if you Terrastallize into normal type, you're pretty safely going to take neutral damage, and that's where I think it's interesting, right? If you have a Pokemon that you're trying to you're trying to mitigate its damage. If you Terrastallize into a type, you still risk that the opponent making a read and hitting you for super effective with any given coverage move. But I feel like normal, you have less of that risk. You're not going to be resisting things. Obviously, you're immune to Ghost, but you still mitigate that super effective damage, and so it's just kind of a safe, generalized option. And again, a lot of Pokemon get access to normal moves in general, not just these super strong moves, Hyper Beam and Giga Impact, but a lot of Pokemon get, Body Slam, Headbutt, those type of moves. And so getting a boost for those kind of spammable moves could be really nice. Fighting Terra. Fighting Terra, I think, is kind of interesting, and it could be more common than people think. So one kind of cool aspect to Fighting Terra is that right now, I feel like a lot of Pokemon would love to use the move Focus Blast, right? They get access to Focus Blast, specifically like fighting or psychic types to hit darks. They get access to Focus Blast, extremely strong, but it's like, do you really want to run this with the 70% accuracy or 75% accuracy, you know, and risk missing a focus blast. That's kind of annoying. But if you do Terrastallize, you know, you get that Tera Blast option, and you get access to a 100% accurate fighting special move. You know, which there's already Aura Sphere, but Aura Sphere does not have nearly as much coverage as Focus Blast currently. So I think the option to have a consistent 100% accurate special fighting move is kind of unique. So that's kind of cool. Another interesting property here is that right now not a lot of Pokemon get, a lot of the Pokemon that get Body Press are not fighting type. You know, they don't have stab, and especially a lot of Pokemon with high defense. So, you know, and these are typically steel types just because steels generally have higher defenses. And so, you know, you have Pokemon like Steelix, Aggron, Registeel, all have access to Body Press. And so they have extremely strong base defense, which makes that Body Press really strong. But if you Terrastallize into fighting type, now you just have that much stronger of a Body Press, you know, 1.5 times stronger. And another interesting property is that Steel actually resists all three of fighting's weaknesses. So Fairy, Flying, and Psychic. So if you have an opponent who has those types, and you know, they're going to be less likely to bring those types against, you know, these Steel Pokemon, which means you're a little bit safer to Terrastallize into a fighting type. You know, fighting type isn't as defensive as Steel generally, but if you are wanting to dish out a little more damage with your body presses, this is a really cool option, I think. So that's kind of a unique property of Fighting Tera. Next up, we've got Ghost Tera. Ghost Tera is actually going to be kind of insane because Terrastallization, as I understand it, happens at the very beginning of the turn, before any moves happen. It's not like a speed ordered type of mechanic. So if you Terrastallize right at the beginning of the turn into Ghost, you can be immune to Fake Out, right? And that's going to be extremely useful in draft, I think. I think, you know, wanting to flow chart against your opponents, if they have a Pokemon with Fake Out, it's extremely annoying to have to play around that, try to make a Protect Read. They can set up, you know, Terrastallizing into Ghost does remove a lot of that, a lot of the read games, I guess. The other cool thing about Ghost Tera is that it's actually an extremely good offensive type because it only has 2 resists, right? Dark and normal. And so you're pretty safe to Terrastallize into Ghost and hit a lot of stuff for neutral damage, which I think is a good characteristic of Terrastallizing. Another really cool thing about Ghost types is that you can escape trapping abilities and moves. So that's a better thing to save in the back. You know, if you're facing somebody with a Gothitelle, with a Dugtrio, something that can trap you, you know, you get stuck with Mean Look or Infestation or something, you can now Terrastallize into Ghost type and then switch out. So I think that's a really interesting property if you have a Pokemon that you're really worried about getting trapped by some of those abilities and moves. So I think Ghost Tera is definitely a strong contender for being one of the best. Next up, we've got Ice Tera. So Ice Tera is a little bit weird. You do have immunity to hail, and you do prevent freezes. Now, that's probably not going to be as much of a concern because if you're Terrastallizing into ice, typically the only moves that can freeze you are ice types. You're already resisting them, but at least you don't have to worry about those random freezes that can be absolutely game-changing. And, you know, if that's your opponent's only out, you know, they need to get a freeze on you. That's kind of nice. But the reason I don't think that's as big of a concern is because generally I feel like the only Pokemon who are going to be using Ice Tera are Pokemon who are already Ice type. I feel like this Terrastallization is, since it's not super defensive, it's really going to be better for just stronger stab ice moves. And you know, Pokemon who want to throw out blizzards or spread ice type moves, those are usually going to be the snow warning Pokemon anyways. You know, Pokemon like Ninetales, like Abomasnow, who are already ice type. and in some cases, it can actually remove a 4 times resist, right? You're at Abomasnow, and you are now 4 times weak to fire. You Terrastallize into ice, and you now are only you only take 2 times damage from fire. So it's if you're facing a Pokemon that has fire coverage but might not be fire type, now that heat wave, that flamethrower, that might not kill the Abomasnow. So removing that 4 times weakness for some of those snow warning Pokemon and getting to throw out just really strong blizzards could be an interesting option for the Ice Terra. But overall, I don't necessarily expect it to be super common. Next up, we've got the Poison Tera. Poison, I think, is kind of a really cool underdog Tera type. It's only got 1 weakness if used with Levitate. You have Pokemon like that, like Weezing already, that can do that, and it's only weak to Psychic type. And I think, and that could prove to be a really annoying Pokemon to take down. Weezing already has a pretty good base special defense, but you could use this with other poison types who maybe have some decent defenses, and or if you have a Levitate Mon, with decent defenses, and you Terrastallize into poison. Well, now if the opponent and another cool thing about that is not a lot of teams are probably going to be carrying Psychic type. Psychic type isn't really a super common offensive typing. So if you do use this, it's going to be pretty tough to take down. And in addition to that, the benefit about Terrastallizing into poison is that you remove the ability to get toxic or to get poisoned. Now, if you switch in later, you can remove toxic spikes, which might be interesting for singles. But a really cool thing about that is that, poison only has 2 weaknesses, and like I said, if you have Levitate, now you only have 1 weakness, and you can't get toxic or poison, which is one of the main ways to take down those heavy Stallmons. You get toxic, and you're going to die, guaranteed, over time. Unless you have some sort of healing move and you can switch out. But in general, I think it's a really, really good stall option. And then in addition, I think it's a good fairy answer, right? So not a lot of Pokemon. I guess fairy only has 2 weaknesses, right? Poison and steel. And I feel like poison is kind of less common. I feel like most people deal with fairy types with steel types. Poison just generally has been less notable in VGC in general. And so poison Terrastallization is a kind of a good mix-up and way to hit those fairy types. Next up, we've got the Water Tera. Water is going to be a really interesting one. I think it's going to be really, really popular early on. You only have 1 weakness, similar to like poison, where if you have Levitate, you get rid of one of those weaknesses. With water, you can do the same thing. If you have Volt Absorb, Sap Sipper, Lightning Rod, if you Terrastallize into water type, you only have 1 weakness. And so that can be really, really just difficult to take those Pokemon down and to mitigate those weaknesses, if you are planning on Terrastallizing into that water type. The other thing that I think is cool about water, which water has always been an extremely prevalent type in VGC and in draft, especially bulky waters. But just rain as an archetype has been extremely strong, and so being able to Terrastallize, your Rain Abuser, your Seismitoad, your Golduck, and get those you already have decently strong stab moves, Muddy Water, Surf, and which are spread. And in the rain, now if you Terrastallize and get an even higher water type boost, I mean, you could really just sweep teams if they don't have a great water answer. So that's really something to watch out for. It just makes that rain archetype, which has been so prevalent, that much better. Next up, we've got the Flying Tera. Flying Tera is really, really interesting in my opinion. It does have some negative aspects. So you do lose like terrain boosts, right? So if you are on misty terrain, now you can get affected by status, right? If you're on psychic terrain, now you can get hit with priority moves. So there are some negative aspects of it that you have to manage. But overall, I think the benefits definitely outweigh that. First off, you get access to more consistent physical flying moves. than fly. So there are a couple Pokemon, for example, I put Landorus Theory in here, that its physical flying type move is fly. And so like with Dynamax, you had access to Max Airstream, 100% accurate, really strong, and it was really, really threatening in that format. Similarly here, you have access to Tera Blast, which is going to be a physical flying type move, on something like Landorus. You don't have to do that 2-turn charge, and you can just, you're already flying type, so you get another boost on top of that. So I think Pokemon like that previously had kind of that sketchy flying coverage, or maybe they only had access to Hurricane. Zapdos is one where it only had special coverage with Hurricane, which unfortunately is just really inaccurate. And so if you want a more consistent way to use that flying stab, Terrastallize, use Tera Blast. So that's another interesting strategy. But one more really, really cool thing I think you can do with Flying Tera is that you can do some interesting things with Earthquake and Bulldoze. So, for example, if you have an electric type, you can very easily do Disquake strategies, right? Discharge Earthquake, and your electric type Terrastallizes into Flying type. You still have access to Discharge, that move as an electric type, but now since you're Flying type, you're not going to get hit by that Earthquake. So that's really cool. And then, but also if you have a Pokemon, you don't have to be electric type. You could be water, grass, whatever. You Terrastallize in a flying type, and you have a partner who's maybe using Scarf Bulldoze or just really fast Bulldoze to lower your opponent's speed. Well, now you're not hit by that Bulldoze, and you can move before them and get a big move off. So I think it's really cool for your own offensive strategies to hit opponents with that Bulldoze or Earthquake. And then it's also good defensively. If your opponent has one of those Bulldoze strategies to lower your speed, you can Terrastallize in a flying type. You avoid that speed drop, and now it kind of ruins their strategy. So that's really, really interesting. And then more so for singles, flying type is immune to some hazards. So you avoid toxic spikes, you avoid normal spikes, you avoid sticky webs. So I think Terrastallizing into flying is going to be really, really common. I don't necessarily want to say it'll be really common in singles because there is Stealth Rocks as well, and you take more damage from that. But in general, I think Flying Tera has a lot more usage than maybe people initially expect. Next up, we've got the Fairy Tera. Fairy, interestingly enough, I don't know if it's going to be that great. It could be good for like a ground type because ground already threatens poison and steel. You still have those ground moves, high horsepower, Earthquake. But then if you can, you can Terrastallize in a Fairy, and then you're not necessarily as worried about those type Pokemon maybe. I think it could be good for like a dragon versus dragon matchup where you have a slower dragon. So if you have a slower dragon type, you're gonna, let's say you both have Draco Meteor, you're gonna get just destroyed by that Draco Meteor. So you want to Terrastallize into Fairy type, mitigate that, and then maybe smack that opposing dragon with a Fairy move, Tera Blast, or just with your dragon move that you have. So could potentially be good for those slower dragon types. And then the other cool thing is that physical Fairy moves were really, really limited, especially in Gen 8. So you had Spirit Break and Grimmsnarl, and then you basically had Play Rough. And Play Rough is 90% accurate, so that's not great. So access to more accurate and then more consistent physical Fairy coverage could be kind of cool. So that's kind of one maybe unique property about the Fairy Tera. Next up, we've got Dragon Tera. So Draco Meteor is already one of the strongest base power moves in the game. Every dragon has access to it. And so being able to make that Draco Meteor that much stronger by Terrastallizing into Dragon type is really, really good for those faster Dragon types. And in general, Dragon is a pretty good defensive typing. It has some of the good common resists, fire, water, grass, electric. And then in addition to that, it's it's similar to how I talked about Ghost type is kind of a good, just kind of standard, offensive typing with only 2 resists, or I guess 1 immunity and 1 resist. Dragon's the same way, 1 immunity in Fairy and 1 resist in Steel. And besides that, you can just throw off kind of pretty safe dragon moves with to hit opponents for neutral damage. So that's pretty interesting. But overall, I don't expect it to be too great. Next up, we've got Psychic Tera. Psychic, again, I don't think it's going to be a really great one. One unique thing I think is that it could be useful for Pokemon that have access to Expanding Force that aren't Psychic type. So that's going to be Pokemon like Wigglytuff, like Blacephalon. They get Expanding Force, and so if you want to just make that Expanding Force that much stronger, I think that's kind of an interesting way to utilize it. Although that's going to be a way more niche. Overall, there are not a ton of benefits to Psychic. It's not a great defensive typing, and then it's right now it's base power moves. It's not like you have super common Psychic moves to take advantage of. If you do see this Tera type, it's going to be more so for Pokemon that are already Psychic type. That's their best stab, and they just want to make their moves, their Psychic moves that much more powerful. So, not necessarily a great Tera type, in my opinion. Next up, we got the Rock Tera type. Rock is going to be really interesting, in my opinion, because you have better access to special rock moves. Right now, you've got Power Gem and Meteor Beam. Meteor Beam is a 2-turn move. Most people run Power Herb with it, but you do also risk the 90% accuracy misses. So I think having access, and in general, there are not too many good special rock Pokemon out there. So you have Neolego, you have Lunatone, but not a lot of Pokemon have good special rock coverage, and so having a strong special attacker, being able to Terrastallize into the rock type, and you now have a Terra Blast move, which is a special rock move, I think is going to be really, really interesting for certain Pokemon. And then you also have more accurate offensive rock options. So on the physical side, I mean, Rock Slide's a great move, but with spread, it's not super strong. And then if you want to use something else, you've got Rock Tomb, you've got Stone Edge. All these moves are not 100% accurate, though. So if you have a rock type and you want to make sure your moves hit, you can Terrastallize into a physical rock type and then use that Terra Blast to just be more consistent with that rock type coverage. The other kind of unique property about rock types is they get that special defense boost in sand. So if you have a sand team or a sand setter, and you want to boost that special defense with your Pokemon, maybe you don't want to run Assault Vest on it. You can just Terrastallize into that rock type, and now you're immune to that sand chip, and you're getting that special defense boost. So I think that could be an interesting strategy for some of those sand teams. Ground Terra. I don't have a ton to say about Ground Terra. I think it's a really good offensive option. You have really strong Earthquakes, which is just kind of one of the best spread moves in the game. And then it hits a lot of types for super effective as well, notably Electric, which only has one weakness, which is Ground, and Steel, which is a super, super defensive typing, but is weak to Ground. So that's something interesting. And then kind of similar to Electric type, but not as great, is that you are immune to stuff like Thunderwave, like Nuzzle, but you still are able to get paralyzed. So it's not quite as good in that regard. So you can still get hit by Glare. You can still get paralyzed by, a raw body slam or something like that. So it's not as great in that regard in avoiding paralysis, but you are immune at least to those electric type moves which cause paralysis. So that's kind of interesting. Another actually one unique property I did think about. I don't think Bolton is in the game necessarily, or maybe Heliolisk, but those Pokemon with Electrify, if you Terrastallize into a ground type and then you use Electrify, any of your opponent's moves can't hit you. So that would be really, really interesting if they kept Electrify in the game with either Bolton or Heliolisk. So that's kind of one unique property about ground, I guess. Next up, we've got the Dark Terra. Dark Terra, I don't necessarily have much to say. I think it'll just be kind of a solid Terra type. It's immune to Prankster moves. I think it's the biggest benefit. If you are facing those Prankster teams, probably more effective in draft. And then you get really strong Sucker Punches, which is one of the stronger priority moves in the game. And it's really nice for just because a lot of Pokemon get Sucker Punch that are not already Dark type. So if you Terrastallize into Dark, you get that super strong Sucker Punch. That could be really interesting. Other than that, I don't expect it to be super game changing. I just kind of expect it to be solid. All right, grass Terra type I think is kind of one of the underdogs as well, similar to poison. It's got some unique properties, right? So you ignore Rage Powder. So getting around one of those redirection options, obviously Follow Me is probably still in the game, but you ignore Follow Me, or sorry, you ignore Rage Powder, which is the other way to redirect attacks. And then you're immune to like Sleep Powder, Spore, Leech Seed. So that's another really nice property of it. And it's got some decent resists. I think ground is going to be fairly common. So being immune to ground, I think water is going to be fairly common, or not being immune to it, but being having a resist to ground, having a resist to water, having a resist to electric, which I think is going to be really common early on in terms of like Terrastallizing into electric with a levitate to remove your weaknesses. I think those are going to be some common terrastallizations, and ground or grass resists all of those. So I think that's kind of another good property of the grass Terra type. Steel Terra, steel. Kind of the best thing I have to say about this is that it just has lots of resists. I think a lot of people are already thinking about that. Like, what's a good safe defensive option to Terrastallize in? Steel. But this is kind of what I was talking about with normal earlier, is where I think normal type, normal type doesn't have any resists, right? Except for it's immune to ghost. Now steel is immune to poison, has a ton of resists, but you have 3 weaknesses, right? Ground, fighting, fire. So you're more likely to get hit with a random ground move, a random earthquake, a random heat wave, than you are to get hit by a random fighting move with a normal terrastallization. So yes, you are more likely to resist a move if you steel terrastallize. But if you normal terrastallize, you're less likely to get hit by a super effective move. So I think that's something to take into consideration when you're trying to plan out your terrastallizations for your Pokemon. And then obviously the other cool thing about Steel Terra in terms of just spread moves is that it does combo well with Sludge Wave. So that's one thing to think about if it's still in the game. And so then next I'm going to move on to just kind of how I think these terrastallization types are going to fare just generally across VGC. So these are my Terra predictions. So initially popular, I think Ghost is going to be extremely popular just for the immunity, double immunities, right, to fighting a normal, specifically Fake Out. I think it's going to be really, really nice. Water, I think for those reasons I said, where if you have Sap Sipper or Lightning Rod, or Volt Absorb, you're able to only have one weakness. Water's just been a really, really strong type in general. It's got that archetype with Rain. I think it's going to be really common initially. Steel, same thing. I think a lot of people are thinking, oh, it's a great defensive typing. It's really safe in terms of resists. Going to terrastallize into steel. Electric with Levitate, I think, is another common thing that people are thinking about right now. So those 4 I definitely expect to be pretty common early on. I don't know how if people will develop counters to them or how long they'll stay up there. I think of any of those, the most likely I think to drop off would be steel. Secretly good, I think, are flying for those bulldoze strategies I talked about. Poison, I think, for those Stallmons. Grass, I think, is just going to be secretly good in terms of being able to hit those waters that are going to be super common, and then ignoring that Rage Powder and Sleep Powder Spore stuff. Normal, I think, is also going to be really, really good. Like, I expect normal to be one of the more popular terrastallization types later in the meta. So that's my prediction. But I think it has a great offensive potential. Overall, just these other types I think are solid. Rock, fire, ice, dragon, ground, dark. I think those are definitely solid options. I don't know how they'll progress. If I had to predict, I think rock, fire, and ground will kind of progress upwards, and ice, dragon, and dark will progress downwards and maybe less popular. That's sort of my initial reaction from that baseline of just being solid. Situationally, Psychic is going to be pretty rare in my opinion. Same with Fairy. I don't think they're great. But I do think Bug and Fighting actually do have some interesting niche uses, and so I do expect those to pop up every so often. But yeah, interestingly, I really just don't expect Fairy and Psychic to be that common. Those are kind of the worst in my opinion, specifically Psychic. And then next up, just kind of overall general terastallizing thoughts. I guess my hot takes, you could say. I think finding ways to utilize Terra types offensively is going to be the move in the meta. And the reason is this. If you think about terastallization and how I've seen some people kind of talk about it, I mean, some people have definitely brought up the offensive capabilities, but I think a lot of people are initially, when they're like, you can change types, their initial thought was, wow, I can remove these 4 times resists. T-Tar going to Ghost, Ferrothorn going to Water. You know, removing those 4 times resistances for those Pokemon who have typically struggled against those types, that was kind of the initial like thoughts that I saw popping up. But if you think about it, if you have your team and you're only focused on resists, you know, let's say you have a Ferrothorn and you're worried about those fire types. Let's say your opponent doesn't even have a fire type, right? You could go a whole game without terastallizing then, and you're going to be fine because your main reason for terastallizing was that defensive property, right? So you could go a whole game without terastallizing, you could still win the game if that's your plan. But since terastallization does give you that extra stab boost, it does give you access to Terra Blast. Being able to take advantage of the offensive capabilities of terastallization, I think is going to be the key. Figuring out how to use it offensively. Now, I mean, you can definitely still use it defensively, but it's going to be more situational. Whereas if you don't, if your opponent doesn't have that type you're worried about, or if you need to maybe get out some damage fast, I think having that plan to use Terra types offensively is going to be the better play. And in general, I think original stab Terra types are going to be super common, just for the reason that you get that much extra boost on top of your normal stab moves, especially with those types that already have those high base power moves. Draco Meteors, Hyper Beams, Overheats. Those are going to be really, really common, in my opinion. And then another, especially in regards to the offensive aspect, finding ways to fill those coverage gaps or those awkward move sets. So like, those inaccurate moves, bad secondary effect moves. You know, maybe it takes 2 turns to attack, or maybe it has a recharge. So finding ways to fill in those coverage gaps and be able to use that Terra type offensively, I think is going to be really cool. And so, like, for example, take a Pokemon like Swampert. Swampert is 4 times weak to grass, right? But Swampert has access to Ice Punch. You have access to Ice Beam. You still have access to moves that can hit that type you're worried about. But if you think about a Pokemon like Kartana, well, Kartana is 4 times weak to fire, but it doesn't have moves that can hit fire types super effectively. So if you Terrastallize into ground, into rock, into water, you now have ways. You now have a coverage move that you didn't previously have to deal with those types. And it doesn't even have to be a type that you're super effective against, or that you're worried about necessarily, but one that you're walled by. So take a Pokemon like like Whimsicott. Maybe you're only running grass and fairy moves, and so you're just totally walled by another. Well, I guess you're still weak to steel, but if you're walled by a certain type, let's say whatever Pokemon you're using, you're walled by a grass type. Well, throw a flying Terrastallization on there, and now you're no longer walled by those grass types, right? I guess Rillaboom's a good example. Rillaboom didn't have anything to hit flying types for super effective. It didn't have a rock move. So Rillaboom was kind of walled by those flying types. And so just having ways to hit those Pokemon that you're walled by, I think is going to be an interesting way to use it. Some other things to think about is that Terra Blast does take up a move slot. So if you're not constantly Terrastallizing, since Terra Blast takes up a move slot, if you're Terrastallizing defensively, it's like, do you always want to be Terrastallizing defensively if you have access to this move, Terra Blast? So I think you want to put Terra Blast on Pokemon that are going to Terrastallize offensively. So that's another kind of reason for that. But one interesting property about it that helps the normal terastallization is that the default type is normal. So, for example, if you have a Snorlax and you want to run just an attacking move, right? You can run Terra Blast, and it's already normal type, so you're already getting that stab bonus. Now, let's say your Snorlax wants to Terrastallize into some other type, whatever. Let's say normal type, just get stronger normal moves, or even like Ghost type to avoid those fighting moves. You do still get that Terra Blast bonus from Terrastallizing, but now if you put Terra Blast on a normal type, you still have a decently strong just coverage move that you get stabbed from. So I think that's kind of one interesting property about Terra Blast. And then I think I haven't seen spoilers for like what the dex is shaping up to be like in Scarlet and Violet, but I think the types that are more common or less common is going to kind of depend on what the popular Terra types are, especially in draft leagues. So if I'm relating this to like Gen 8 draft leagues, right? I feel like fire types and steel types were kind of hard to come by, right? Water types are all over the board. So if you already have a ton of water type options, that you're going to have one on your team, that's fine. You may even have two. But I've had plenty of teams where I didn't have a fire type, or maybe I didn't have a steel type. And it's like just because other people drafted those Pokemon and there wasn't any great options for me to pick. But now I have the option to, instead of having to draft a fire type or having to draft a steel type, I can just draft a couple Pokemon who can maybe use those Terrastallization types effectively, and then those can be my, pseudo fire type or pseudo grass type, or sorry, pseudo steel type. So I think that's kind of the dex availability of different types, just generally across the board, is really going to dictate what the popular Terra types are, right? So I think that's going to be one kind of big consideration for draft. But overall, those are kind of my initial takes on Terrastallization. If there's anything I missed, please let me know in the comments. Let me know how you like this, or if you want more videos like this. But yeah, overall, that's going to be it. Peace.